Act 1. The 10 days of preparation. When a Viking raider died, his body was not burned immediately. It was placed in a temporary grave for 10 full days. This period of waiting was sacred. It gave the family time to prepare everything the dead man would need for his journey. And we're not talking about a few flowers and a prayer. We're talking about food, drink, weapons, armor, livestock, jewelry, ships, and in many cases, human beings. Archaeologists working at the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, discovered in 1904, uncovered something that still chills researchers today. Two women buried together inside a 70-foot Viking longship. One was around 70 years old, clearly a person of high status, possibly a queen or a powerful priestess. The other was younger, in her 50s, and the younger woman's bones showed signs of trauma consistent with being killed. She wasn't there because she chose to be. She was there because someone of higher status had died, and tradition demanded a companion for the afterlife. This wasn't an isolated case. At the Birka burial site in Sweden, archaeologists found similar patterns. At Repton in England, where a Viking army wintered in 873 AD, a mass grave revealed the bodies of warriors buried alongside what appeared to be sacrificial victims, possibly slaves or prisoners. For 10 days while the body waited, the dead man was dressed and redressed. His weapons were polished. His shield was repaired. His ship was dragged inland, sometimes for miles, and placed in a specially dug pit. Around the ship, a wooden frame would be constructed. Inside the ship, his most valuable possessions would be arranged. And around the entire site, the community would gather. Not just family, not just warriors, the entire village. Because a Viking funeral was not a private affair. It was a public event, a spectacle, a ritual that reaffirmed the community's beliefs about death, status, and the gods themselves. But what happened on the 10th day, what Ibn Fadlan witnessed with his own eyes on that riverbank in 921 AD, is the part of Viking history that most documentaries refuse to show, because it crosses every modern moral line we have. And yet, to the Vikings, it was an act of supreme honor. Asti 2, the eyewitness account. Let's go back to Ibn Fadlan. His account, called the Risala, survives today in fragments, but the section describing the Viking funeral is intact, detailed, and brutally specific. When the chieftain died, his slaves were gathered together. A single question was asked: who will die with him? According to Ibn Fadlan, one young slave girl stepped forward and said, "I will." From that moment, her fate was sealed. For the next 10 days, she was treated like royalty. She was given the finest food, the strongest mead, the most expensive jewelry. She was bathed, perfumed, and dressed in silk. She was guarded constantly, not to keep her in, but because if she changed her mind, the entire ritual would be ruined. But here's the part that historians still debate. Was she truly volunteering? Or was she drugged, manipulated, and coerced into a decision she could no longer escape? The evidence suggests both. Ibn Fadlan describes her drinking constantly throughout the 10 days. She sang, she laughed, she showed no fear. By the final day, she was almost certainly intoxicated beyond reason, and possibly given hallucinogenic plants, like henbane, which archaeologists have found in Viking graves across Scandinavia. On the final day, the ritual began. The ship was prepared. The chieftain's body was dressed in his finest clothes and placed on a couch inside a tent constructed on the ship's deck. Around him were laid weapons, food, and slaughtered animals: horses, dogs, even cattle. Ibn Fadlan describes the sacrifice of a dog cut in half and thrown into the ship. 2 horses were ridden until they sweated, then killed with swords. 2 cows were beheaded. Then a rooster and a hen. And then came the slave girl. She was lifted 3 times over a wooden frame shaped like a doorway. Each time, she was asked what she saw. According to Ibn Fadlan's account, she said, "The first time, I see my father and mother. The second time, I see all my dead relatives sitting together. The third time, I see my master in paradise. Paradise is beautiful and green. He is calling me. Take me to him." Then she was given a cup of strong drink. She drank it. She was given a second cup. She drank that too. And as she drank, she sang a long farewell song. She was led onto the ship. 6 men entered the tent with her. What happened next? Ibn Fadlan describes plainly. The men assaulted her. Then the old woman, the angel of death, entered with a wide-bladed knife. 2 men held the girl down. The old woman placed a rope around her neck and gave the ends to 2 men to pull. Then she stabbed the girl repeatedly between the ribs while the men strangled her. The girl died beside her master. And then, finally, came the fire. but even the fire had meaning, because the way the smoke rose, the speed, the direction, the color, was watched by the entire community. It was a message from the gods about whether the ritual had worked. Act 3. The fire and the meaning. The closest male relative of the dead chieftain approached the ship completely naked, walking backward, holding a torch. He never looked at the ship directly. He simply lit it from behind, and the entire vessel went up in flames within minutes. Ibn Fadlan describes the scene vividly. Within an hour, the ship, the bodies, the animals, the weapons, everything were reduced to ash. A Viking standing next to him noticed Ibn Fadlan's horrified expression and said something that has echoed through history for over 1,000 years. You Arabs are fools. You bury your dead in the dirt where worms and insects eat them. We burn ours in fire, so they reach paradise in the blink of an eye. For the Viking, fire was not destruction, it was transportation. The smoke carried the soul upward. The faster the ship burned, the faster the soul reached its destination. Burial in the ground was considered slow, undignified, and dangerous, because the slower the soul's journey, the more chance it had of getting lost, or worse, returning. After the fire died down, a mound of earth was raised over the burned remains. A wooden post was driven into the center of the mound, with the dead man's name carved into it in runes. This was his marker, his legacy, his warning to the world that a great man had passed through this place. But here's what most people miss about the Viking funeral. Not every Viking got this treatment, far from it. The ritual Ibn Fadlan witnessed was reserved exclusively for the elite: chieftains, jarls, wealthy traders, powerful warriors. The vast majority of Vikings were buried in much simpler ways. Common raiders received simple inhumation in shallow graves, sometimes with a single weapon, sometimes with nothing at all. Slaves and the poor were often buried without any ceremony, in unmarked pits outside the village. Your funeral depended entirely on 3 things: your status, your wealth, and the manner of your death. Act 4. The 4 deaths. In Norse belief, how you died determined where your soul went, far more than how you lived. Die gloriously in battle, with a weapon in your hand and your wounds facing the enemy. You earned Valhalla. Odin's Valkyries would descend from the sky and carry your soul to the great hall, where you would feast and fight forever, preparing for Ragnarok, the final battle at the end of the world. Die in battle, but be chosen by Freya instead. You went to Folkvanger, a field of warriors ruled by the goddess of love, fertility, and war. Half of all battle-slain warriors went here. Vikings considered it almost equal to Valhalla. Die of old age, sickness, or accident. You went to hell. Not the Christian hell. Norse hell was not a place of punishment. It was simply a cold, misty, gray underworld ruled by the goddess Hel, daughter of Loki. It wasn't torture, but it wasn't glorious either. Most Vikings dreaded ending up here. Die at sea. Your soul belonged to Ran, the sea goddess who dragged drowned sailors down with her great net. Some sagas describe this as a peaceful afterlife. Others describe it as terrifying. Souls trapped in cold water for eternity. This is why Vikings preferred death by violence. Why old warriors would sometimes throw themselves into battles they couldn't win. Why some elderly Vikings, sensing the end of their lives, would take their own lives by sword rather than die in bed. Because dying with a weapon in hand, even if you put it there yourself, was better than ending up in Hell's gray realm. Act 5. The terrifying secret. But there's one more part of the Viking burial ritual that almost no one talks about. The part archaeologists are still uncovering today. The part that reveals what Vikings were truly afraid of. It wasn't death. It was the dead. Across Scandinavia and the British Isles, archaeologists have discovered Viking graves where the bodies were treated in deeply unusual ways: buried face down, pinned beneath heavy stones, decapitated, with the head placed between the legs or under the body, wrapped in iron chains, pierced with wooden stakes through the chest. These are not ritual killings. These are containment burials. The Vikings were terrified of one specific phenomenon: the draugr, the undead, a corpse that refused to stay buried. According to Norse sagas, draugr were created when a person died with unfinished business, murdered without revenge, dishonored in life, owed a debt at death, or simply too greedy to leave their possessions behind. These corpses would rise from their graves, swollen and black with decomposition, and terrorize the living. They could grow to enormous sizes. They could change shape. They could turn into smoke and pass through walls. They were almost impossible to kill, A draugr could only be defeated by being decapitated and burned, with the ashes scattered at sea. So, when a Viking died under suspicious or dishonorable circumstances, the community took no chances. They weighed the body down, they cut off the head, they drove stakes through the heart. Sometimes they even built stone walls around the grave, not to keep grave robbers out, but to keep the dead inside. The other rituals nobody talks about, the body washing ritual. Before the 10 days of preparation began, the dead Viking's body had to be washed, but not by anyone. Only specific women in the community were allowed to perform this ritual. They were called the corpse washers, and their role was sacred. The body was cleaned with cold water, then anointed with oils and herbs, including juniper, which Vikings believed warded off evil spirits. The fingernails were trimmed carefully. According to Norse belief, if a corpse's nails were left long, they would be used to build Naglfar, the ship of the dead that would carry an army of giants to destroy the gods at Ragnarok. Every Viking funeral was, in a small way, a ritual to delay the end of the world. The rune carving ritual. After the body was prepared, runes were carved, not just on the grave marker, but on the weapons, on the ship, sometimes on the body itself. These weren't decorations, they were spells. Protective magic meant to guide the soul, ward off the draugr, and ensure the dead reached the right afterlife. Specific runes were used for specific purposes. Tiwaz for warriors heading to Valhalla. Algiz for protection against evil spirits. Ansus to invoke Odin's blessing. The wrong rune carved in the wrong place was considered worse than no rune at all. It could redirect the soul to the wrong realm entirely. The animal sacrifice ritual. We mentioned the animals briefly before. The dog, the horses, the cattle. But the way these animals were killed was itself a ritual. Each species had a specific method. Dogs were cut in half and thrown into the ship, one half forward, one half backward, to guide the soul through both the past and the future. Horses were ridden until exhausted, then beheaded with a single sword stroke. The blood was collected and sprinkled on the ship. Cattle were beheaded facing east, toward the rising sun, to symbolize rebirth. Roosters and hens were sacrificed last, their blood used to bless the wooden frame of the ship. Every animal had a purpose. Every wound had meaning. The mourning ritual, and finally, the mourning itself. For 30 days after the funeral, the dead Vikings family was forbidden from cutting their hair, washing their clothes, or eating cooked meat. They wore ash on their foreheads. They slept on the floor instead of beds. Women would scratch their own faces until they bled, a ritual called grief marking, which Norse sagas describe as proof of love for the dead. Men would refuse to laugh or smile for the entire mourning period. Breaking any of these rules was believed to insult the dead, and an insulted Viking spirit was the most dangerous spirit of all. Because that's exactly the kind of soul that came back as a draugr. These 4 rituals, washing, rune carving, animal sacrifice, mourning, surrounded the burial like layers of armor, each one designed to protect the living, guide the dead, and maintain the fragile balance between the world of men and the world of gods. So the next time you picture a Viking funeral, forget the flaming ship drifting peacefully into the sunset. That image is a lie sold to you by movies and bad history books. The reality was something else entirely. Picture a riverbank in 921 AD. Picture a wooden ship dragged onto land, packed with treasure, animals, and a dead chieftain dressed in silk. Picture a drugged slave girl singing her own death song. Picture 6 men entering a tent. Picture an old woman with a knife. Picture a naked man walking backward with a torch, refusing to look at the ship he is about to set ablaze. Picture an entire community standing around the fire, watching the smoke rise, praying that the gods accept their offering, and praying even harder that the dead man stays dead. That was a Viking funeral, not a ritual of beauty, a ritual of fear, honor, blood, and absolute belief that what happened in that moment determined the course of eternity. The Vikings didn't fear death, they feared doing it wrong.